Good morning. Don't mean to interrupt you. You're all getting acquainted. This is very nice. I want to welcome you to this meeting of the League of Women Voters of Bowling Green. My name is Lee McLeod, and I'm the chapter president. The program will be started in just a couple minutes. I'm not introducing anybody, but I'm just making sure that you all have had a chance. Point out if you haven't noticed yet that there's coffee over here in the corner, decaf and regular, and there's some really yummy cookies at the next table. So those are all good things. And make sure if you have an opportunity, get acquainted with people, especially if you're new here, or if other people are new and you haven't seen them, by all means, reach out, tell them what you do. If you are very active on a committee, they might be interested in participating in that. And so we'd like to see you do some communication that way. But we'll take care of it right now because I see we were all taking a good look at cookies and coffee. So we're a little later than we expected to be. So for that, Shar, if you would like to come up.
Sure.
Pass it on to her. We have some good topics, good speakers. There's things to read as well. So thank you, Shar.
Thanks, everyone. Glad to see everyone here. It's a pleasure to see so many people and so many new faces. I love to chat with everyone afterwards and meet you. I'm really grateful that everyone is here because you could be anywhere else in the world, and you're here with me today and us as the League of Women Voters. My name is Shar Katzner. For those who don't know me, I'm on the board, and being that there's a lot of new members here, we thought we would just take a few minutes before our presentation presenters to just kind of give you a little background about what the League is and what the League does, and talk a little bit about what it means to be nonpartisan. So I first kind of want to start with a couple of quotes that are two of my favorite quotes. The first one is attributable to Einstein. It says, "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything." And then the last one is from Amanda Gorian. She's the poet laureate, and she says, "For there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." And in these times, I really want to be one of those people who are brave enough to be it. The League of Women Voters has been around for over 100 years, and our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy, and that mission has not changed. So the fact that what has really changed is our need to have to defend democracy right now, especially in the face of a lot of voter suppression. There is a lot of misinformation out there that is aimed to divide us and undermine our democracy. And that's why we have to stand up to these attacks, regardless of what some people may say. So while we are a nonpartisan group, we are going to get attacked for being partisan because of the times that we're in. And that came from the U.S. League of Women Voters blog about remaining partisan. So what does it mean to be nonpartisan? What it means for us is that we don't oppose or endorse any political candidates or parties. And we don't ask our members what their political affiliation is. We have positions, and those are arrived at through a rigorous study and a democratic adoption by the majority of the members, be it at our annual meetings or at our conventions. And the positions that we have around climate, healthcare, voting rights have been in place since the early 70s and earlier than that. And issues are not partisan. So what nonpartisan doesn't mean we're apolitical. So we believe that an informed citizenry is critical to a functioning democracy, and that voters always have to know the facts, no matter how difficult the facts might be to accept. And this is especially challenging right now when people have deeply held beliefs about their candidate or their political party. Our league, the League advocates for various policy reforms that are arrived at through issues-based positions and careful study, like I mentioned before. And so we value the voices of everyone in Bowling Green, every Ohioan, and every American, because our democracy calls us to care about equity and human rights, and because our government works the best when all of our voices are heard. So what this means is that the League of Women Voters is calling us to speak up and speak out. We've always supported sunshine laws, freedom of the press, campaign finance reform, voter rights, and public education, so that everyone can understand what our government does. And as a non-partisan organization, the League is going to call out statements, actions, policies, and that are counter to our values and principles of the League and the Constitution. And advocating for those things are not partisan. So at least what the League considers not partisan is advocating for the checks and balances on our government, calling out government overreach, calling an elected official to say, obey the Constitution, and advocating for every person. I'm too quickly. Right here is, this was posted on Instagram a couple of days ago from the League of Women Voters of the US. And this is what they've talked about right now in our current climate. And they are saying that we are in a critical time, a 5-star fire of our democracy, unprecedented, breathtaking assault of American democracy, a full-scale attack on all Americans, and that we won't back down, including on a local level. So I'm not going to go over all this stuff on here, it's a lot. But it's just to say that the League of Women Voters is a federated system. So we have the US, and then we have the state, and then we have our local league. So we can build on the positions. So like I said, we have positions that are studied, and then we can use whatever position that has been studied, no matter what level it comes from. So at the US level, they create all the positions for what's going on in the federal government, at the state government, and so forth. So based on those things, we coordinate to speak with one voice. We never oppose anything of a league position, but it flows down. So we can lobby for anything at the local level that the state has approved and has a position for, or at the US level that the US has a position for. These are the main principles of the US League. Just to give you an example of what our positions are always based on these main principles. So a representative government that follows the Constitution, a balance among the 3 branches of government, informed and active participation in the government, access to public education that provides equal opportunity to vote for all, competent personnel, clear assignment of responsibility, adequate funding or financing and coordination among the different agencies and levels of government, and a government that's responsive to the will of the people. And then cooperation with other nations is essential in the search of solutions to world problems and promotion of world peace. So this is just a list of the high-level positions that the US has. So we can use any of these positions when we're lobbying at the local level. So that means we're talking to our local representatives about any of these issues because the league has a position on them. And you can find out everything about them at the impact of issues 24, 26. So these were just reaffirmed at our last convention. Then at the state level, these are all the state positions that we have. And we're just getting, it's called the LWVO Agenda for Action. And if you go there, you can read about every single position that we have there. Some are for, some against, different things like they're against armed school personnel. But we can use any of these to talk at the local level as well. And then finally, we have our local positions and programs. So these are the ones that we study locally and made a priority at our local league. So it doesn't go back up the tree, it only goes down. So they can't use our local position at the state level, but we can use all their positions to do the works of our use for our mission. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellen, who's going to introduce our next speaker.
Hi, we have somebody who has come out on a Saturday morning to talk to us about the Bowling Green School levy, which is on the May ballot. The May ballot is very sparse this year, but the school levy is the only levy or issue on the ballot. And so Jeff Dennis is here, and he is passing out some information to the tables, and he will come up and I'll take over for passing out, and he can come up and talk.
It's really clear. Oh, thank you.
Apologize about that, but all of the information is on our website if you want to get it there, bgffs.com. Apologize that I'm a few minutes late this morning. We had a plumbing issue at my house, so we still have a plumbing issue at my house. All right. My name is Jeff Dennis. I'm here on behalf of Bowling Green Families for Schools. We are we're a group of parents, local business owners, young professionals who are helping to organize around this year's upcoming school levy. It's going to be on the May ballot, so voting starts in, I believe, about 2 weeks. So it's coming up. If you need to update your registration, check your registration. I think there's probably some great resources back there, but now's the time to be doing that, or encouraging your friends, family, neighbors to do that as well. What is on the ballot? It is a 0.75% income tax, which will last for 5 years, as opposed to the issue that's on in November, which is continuing. So we did adjust that, I think, as a way to be responsive to the community. I think that'll add a little bit more accountability. If we like the way things are going, we have the opportunity to approve that again in 5 years. I am passing out an FAQ. We're passing out an FAQ here that has a lot of great information. I tend to like to answer a little bit more questions from you versus standing up here talking at you. So if there's any questions that you have, I'd like to answer those. Anybody to get started? Sure.
Hi, my name is Bruce. So we have the one in May, the 0.75, and then there's a renewal in November also on the ballot?
I don't believe so, no.
No, oh, okay, I misunderstood.
Yeah.
The one of last November.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what he was talking about.
Yes, yeah, no, I'm sorry. This is the issue that was on last November. This is gonna cover, it's an operating levy, so that covers day-to-day operations. About 82% of our operating budget are teachers and staff. So what the district has done at this point, in order to balance the budget for next year's school year, is make $2.6 million in cuts. That includes all extracurriculars, sports, marching band, orchestra, Model UN. It also includes any groups that use the schools as community centers. For example, the community band, Kiwanis Pancake Breakfast, Boy Scouts, PTOs. All of these entities are going to be finding new spaces to host their events if we do not reverse these cuts in May. So it is a very, I don't think you can overstate the importance of this operating levy to this community. For those of you who don't know, I'm a member of City Council, so I view a lot of these issues through that lens. And from the city's perspective, another item that they're talking about, or that has already been approved, is cut to all busing for students within the city of Bowling Green. I don't know anybody, particularly in my age bracket, younger families, who are choosing a place to purchase a home, start a business, move in general, if they know that their kids can't get bused to school and they're not going to have any of the opportunities that they would have at neighboring districts. As of today, frankly, neighboring districts are having quite a challenge as well. I mean, you look to Perrysburg, Otsego, a lot of these districts are facing the same challenges we are. So I guess if there's a silver lining, maybe that's it.
Can you talk, about how much the city uses to, school vouchers?
Quite a bit.
Can you repeat the question?
Repeat the question.
Yes. So the question is how much the district loses to school vouchers. You know, I know it's not any surprise to this group, but you guys have done a ton of great work on, you know, the voucher issue and really the assault on public education that we are seeing from Columbus and have seen for a long time. We've got an unconstitutional school funding formula that is overly reliant on property taxes. And there are just a variety of ways that our Columbus politicians are letting us down. School vouchers is, I think, one of the more recent developments. You know, for our purposes, I think we're really trying to focus on the local impact because we don't want to alienate any voters who might, you know, like our Columbus politicians, I guess. I'm trying to be diplomatic. Sure.
Can you clarify if social security income or benefits is considered income tax?
No, so by state law, that is exempt from school district income tax, and that's covered, number 5 on the FAQ. Seniors are also eligible for a tax credit as well. I'm a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer, you should talk to your tax professional. Everybody's tax situation is a little bit different.
How much money is the Bowling Green receiving, if any, from the casino taxes?
Now, I don't have that information. You can reach out to our new treasurer, Matt Fiesel, who has been incredible from our
Could you
perspective.
please repeat the questions?
Yeah.
Sure. The question is, how much money are we receiving from the casino? I don't have that information. Our treasurer could get that information for you. He's been very responsive. Anytime we need information, he's been great about getting back to us right away and is extremely knowledgeable. Any others? All right.
I'm sorry to be the only one speaking.
No problem, Bruce.
How many of the administrators, and I'm not talking about, you know, principals, how many the above are going to be eliminated because of this, because of any job losses?
I want to say it is about. Sure. You can tell I don't like speaking to groups very much. The question is how many administrators are going to be eliminated in these cuts? There are a number, I want to say around a dozen administrators. The district has released the list of cuts, which I think is another thing to keep in mind when you're out talking to folks in the community about this. These are not threats. These cuts have already been approved. These administrators, these teachers, these coaches have all been sat down and told that they are not going to have a job next year. So it's already been done. This is our last opportunity to reverse those cuts. In terms of number of administrators, there are a number of them. The other thing I will tell you is that if you look at the number of administrators that our district has per pupil, our administrators we have fewer administrators per pupil than nearly every district in our area. So our district actually has been run very lean for a very long time. We've got below the state average, we've got below neighboring districts, and we are below the districts throughout the state of a similar size. So administrative bloat really is not the problem at all. Sure.
Is the district also facing federal funding cuts, which would make this money more essential?
The question is the district facing federal funding cuts, which would make this more essential? I haven't watched the news this morning, but I think that probably changes from day to day. Safe to say that we cannot rely on the federal government for much right now. Yep, in the back.
On the paper you handed out, you crossed off all of these items. Does that mean they're totally eliminated or partially affected?
Totally eliminated. Yes, well, no after school music at all. Yes. No, school nurses, I will say, are not totally eliminated. We are reducing the number, I think from 5 to 2. So again, our website, the school district also has a great FAQ that they put out and are always happy to answer questions. So if you have questions about any specific program and what the impact's gonna be on the students' day-to-day lives, I would reach out to either the superintendent, the treasurer, or you can get more information off of our website as well. Yep.
With the November levy, there was lots of, I would say, semi-organized opposition to that. Do we face that with this May levy coming up?
Yes, so do we face organized opposition with this levy coming up? I think in our district over the last, let's say 10 years, we have seen an organized opposition that is opposed to every issue that has been put forward when it comes to school funding. So I think it's safe to say that those folks are as organized right now. From our perspective, we're looking at a turnout of between 12 and 15%, which is going to be about 3,300 votes. This really is about talking to our supporters and making sure everybody is going to be voting. It's going to be a fraction of the number of voters that we saw last November. So it's going to come down to who is more engaged. Anybody else? Going once? Well, thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you again for coming, Jeff. I hope you're talking to the choir here, but the more information that is available, the better. My next task is to welcome, and I'm delighted to welcome our speaker today, our main speaker today. Everybody's been talking so far. Dominic Wells is an associate professor of political science and at BGSU and director of the Fire Administration Program. He teaches courses in American government and public administration. His research primarily focuses on public employee labor unions, and he has written a book called From Collective Bargaining to Collective Begging, How Public Employees Win and Lose the Right to Bargain. Dominic is been in Bowling Green for about 3 years, I think. 5, oh my goodness, time flies. He's my neighbor. So he had a hard time saying no. Thank you very much, Dominic. I'll turn it over to you. Thank
you. So yeah, I am Ellen's neighbor. I'm gonna see if I can do this from that. Might be a little too low. There we go. That's better. Okay, so hi, my name is Dominic Wells. Thank you for the introduction. As mentioned, Ellen is my neighbor down the street. So when I got the email from her asking me to come speak today, that of course my first reaction was, yeah, I'd like to do this. Ellen and Chris walk through the neighborhood and they often see me out in the yard, especially in the summer, trying to get a ball out of a tree because I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they want you to get the ball stuck in the tree. They think that's entertaining, and then as soon as you get it stuck in the tree, they want you to take another ball and knock it down. So I wait for Chris and Ellen when I need shoulder surgery for that. But yeah, so it's really awesome to be here today, and so what I'm going to talk about is defending democracy in polarized times, and I'm going to try to leave plenty of room for discussion and questions. It's so nice to see so many friendly faces here today, because I know people from my church, people from sorry, I haven't been there in a while. We're planning on going tomorrow. People from my church, people from BGSU, people from the different community organizations. It's a great group. I'm very happy to be here, and we're going to talk about defending democracy in polarized times. So I like to give kind of an agenda. Let's see if So we're going to talk about Great. I'm going to talk about political polarization today, threats to democratic institutions, and then what can be done to defend democracy. And that last part, a lot of that is going to be discussion. So I'll take questions, and we can kind of have an open discussion about this, because that's a big task. I have some colleagues at the university, by the way. The political science department is fantastic. A lot of really wonderful people. I'm sure would be happy to come talk with you too sometime. And I bounced some ideas off of them too. We started a democracy and public policy network, which actually focuses a lot on these issues of cutting down polarization and doing things in a nonpartisan way. So couple things. Number one, I was informed that some people might have to leave early. I'm not offended by that at all. I told them students walk out on me all the time, and for not as good a reason. So don't worry about that. And number two, I set a timer because I get talking and then I don't stop talking. And so I set a timer to remind me to leave time. So if an alarm goes off, that's what it is. It's like, Dom, wrap it up. We gotta get to some discussion. So that's what we're going to talk about. And when I got the ask to come talk, just as an introduction here, one of the things that was mentioned was this is a nonpartisan group that gets labeled as partisan sometimes with some of the things because the issues align with one party over another, and so nonpartisan groups are having increasingly difficult time taking action and remaining nonpartisan. And political polarization, the tendency to see things through an ideological lens, contributes to this problem. I just realized there's a camera right there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I
You're
stepped
good.
off. Did I step out of it?
You're good now. You're good.
Okay, cool. So one of the other reasons, there are a couple of other reasons why I wanted to make sure I took the opportunity to come talk today. But one of the big ones was I really also experienced the same kind of problem in groups that I'm in. So I put the logo of the BGSUFA up there. I'm very involved in our faculty association, and we actually have these same kind of conversations. We focus on collective bargaining issues related to our labor union, our ability to bargain, and we have membership that we're not all liberals, not all conservatives by any means, of course. Our issues tend to align with one party more than another, but we have, as an executive committee, have these discussions all the time. Don't endorse candidates. Do we endorse candidates? Should we? We have not. We didn't even endorse a candidate who was on the executive committee at one point, who then ran for office. Like, we've done really trying to stay out of partisan politics, but as you know, that is becoming increasingly difficult with what's going on in Columbus and Washington. So groups like this that are doing this good issue-based work, it's become more difficult to not be cast aside as partisan. So that was one of the other reasons I wanted to make sure I came and talked today, because this is a really fantastic discussion we're going to have. So when I was asked, I looked at my calendar and I saw, oh, the kids play soccer on Saturday morning. Uh-oh. Then I looked at the weather and I said, it's going to be 40 degrees and windy. And then I told my spouse, hey, I can't make that soccer game. So thank you. It's cold out there at Dunbridge Field. It's very windy.
Yeah. Spring soccer is no joke.
Okay, so I know that I'm talking to a very educated crowd here. So some of this is just going to be things you already are pretty aware of, but maybe we'll get our kind of juices flowing as to what we will get to with discussion and suggestions and questions. So I want to start with party polarization. The shift of party positions from moderate to political extremes. We've had a couple of polarizations. So we've had parties that have moved more drastically in one direction than another, and I have some graphs that show some of this too. There's some causes of this polarization. Become polarized over time. In political science, there's certainly no discussion about whether the parties in Congress have gotten more polarized. That is like lots of evidence for that. That's definitely happening. There have been some debates about whether the general public is as polarized as Congress or is becoming more polarized. Now, the people who write and study the general population's polarization are also saying like this is happening here now too. There's some things that have happened that have led to our polarization that scholars point out. So not an exhaustive list, but the nationalization of politics. So local news used to be more important. People used to watch local news more. They used to read local papers. Obviously, we know the news industry, especially at the local level and kind of that mid-range level, is struggling a lot. So we used to focus more on local issues. We kind of have more of a nationalization of politics. When people talk about politics, they're usually talking about Washington or their senators. And when I talk to family and friends about politics, we don't know who our state representatives are. A lot of people don't even understand the difference between the federal government and the state government. Believe it or not, like you probably had these conversations with people before, but you talk about a state issue and then somebody will say, well, what can senator, and then they list off their federal senator instead. So we really think of politics in a more national way than we used to, more so than we used to. The technology and news sources have contributed to our polarization. 24-hour news networks. You can find, if you want news through either the internet or cable television, as you know, you can find news with your worldview. And you can be getting information that's kind of an echo chamber. And this kind of puts us all into our little silos, and this advance of technology and spreading information on the internet and also through the through cable news networks like MSNBC, CNN, Fox News. You get things through an ideological lens, and that's also contributed to our polarization. And then there are some structural issues too, and what I want to touch on is gerrymandering, which everybody in this room knows very well about. A colleague of mine and I, Dr. David Jackson, we've actually worked on some work about redistricting and some different voter reforms going on in Michigan, and then what's going on here. And basically our whole argument is that Ohio can still be a swing state if it weren't for these structural things that stand in the way. That we basically look at some data there, and we show that demographically and ideologically, Michigan and Ohio are not that different among the general public. But what is different is they have citizen-driven redistricting. We have a very partisan redistricting process. They have same-day voter registration. We do not. Different rules, and that has changed the game as to who you get into office. So again, an issue I know you are all very familiar with, but gerrymandering plays a role because that definitely impacts which politicians are in Columbus or in Washington that are representing us, and they don't have any reason to moderate their views if they know that they can play to their base, be even more liberal or conservative, and still be reelected. So that contributes to polarization too. Now, looking for the silver lining. I know, right? Great. Looking for the silver lining in this, if there is any one silver lining, it does mean that this polarization gives us distinct choices. A decade ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever, I used to hear people say when I was in college here, or because I was a student here too many years ago, and I don't want to end it anymore. When I was a student here, I used to hear people say this, and I occasionally get students when I first started teaching this, they don't see a difference between the two parties. And that was a big thing in like the 90s, I would say the 1990s when I watched, there's like some cartoons I watch, yes, cartoons, but there's some political things that jokes that have been put into shows in the past that they make this joke that it's the two candidates are exactly the same, they just have interchangeable names, they say the same things. Those, you don't see those references anymore much. You don't hear people say that the parties aren't different, that they don't understand the difference between Republican and Democrat, or the candidates are all the same. That is maybe one positive to all of this polarization, is that you have clear choices now. Like there's not a whole lot of overlap, so very distinct, clear choices. I don't know if that's a small silver lining. Yeah, we don't like the trade-off so much, but. Okay, so I know this is difficult for people to see, especially in the back, but I'll explain. So this is a graph of partisan polarization in US Congress. So we start with, the first one here is the 93rd Congress, that in 1973-74, and then the last one down here is the 112th Congress, 2011 to 2012. Let me describe what is happening here. In these graphs, each of them, they have a graph of the voting patterns of Democrats and Republicans in Congress. And you'll see in the earliest graph here, from 73-74, there is a lot of overlap. There's the middle line shows the kind of like the median vote, the most moderate vote. And you see there's a lot of overlap between Republican votes in Congress and Democratic votes in Congress. And then over time, you see those columns of red and blue move apart from each other to the point where in the 112th Congress in 2011, there's no overlap. You have Democrats only voting to the left of an issue and Republicans only voting to the right of an issue. And so this maps the polarization in Congress over time. And the way, the way this is done is by people a lot smarter than me. The way this is done is by people who take scores of congressional votes throughout time, and they track these for decades. And so we have scores in political science that can be used to show how moderate or liberal or conservative the voting patterns are. One of the things that also happened at this time, in the middle of this, is less compromise in Congress itself. Former Speaker of the House, Dennis Hassard, those of you might remember him from the 2000s, Republican Speaker of the House, has this informal rule that's been kind of implemented by every speaker since, called the Hassard Rule. And what that says is you need a majority of the majority to bring anything to the floor of the House. So if something has, what this was this is a strategy so that if you're the Speaker of the House and you have a majority, even if there's an issue where you could get a whole bunch of the minority party and then some of your party to pass it, and there would be a majority of the House that would vote for it, what they do is they don't bring that to the floor because it doesn't have a majority of their party. So he refused to put anything on the floor for a vote unless a majority of the Republican Party in Congress supported it, not a majority of the House. And so this cuts down on, and he claimed later that was an informal, it is an informal rule, it's nothing written that you have to do, but he claimed that rule didn't actually exist, yada, yada, yada. But that's how the practice works. And so there's less give and take in Congress because of things like that too. one of the other things that had happened in this period of time too was the elimination of earmarking. So earmarks could be put into a bill, something could be put into a bill earmarked for bringing like funding back to your district and for a project. And so people viewed that as very corrupt, like, oh, this individual member doesn't actually support this bill, but they got this little thing in there for their district, and so now they support the bill. Okay, downsides to that is people can say, well, maybe these projects shouldn't be funded, maybe this is wasteful. The positive to earmarking when it did exist was that you had more compromise. You were able to make trade-offs and get Republicans and Democrats to vote for the same things because there was something in it for the people in their district. So there's a number of different things that happen structurally in Congress over this time, besides just the things related to gerrymandering and getting more extreme candidates and things like that. Okay, again, I will describe the best I can this graph. So this is the widening partisan differences in political values. So this is from Pew Research Center's values survey. And so this graph shows the percentage point difference between Republicans and Democrats on questions about values. So, typical things that we care about as Americans, individualism, liberty, just our values. And as you can see, I don't actually have like the specific questions here, but starting at the bottom here, the point difference in our values survey between Republicans and Democrats in 1987 was only 10%. By 2012, it's 18%. So there's been a widening gap in how we view ourselves as Americans and what we value and what we value in society. So the last graph was about Congress being polarized. This is starting to show how we're becoming polarized as the general public too. Also, a related point on polarization, the one that I want to point out here. So this is partisan voting in presidential elections. The big red blocks are loyal partisans. But the yellow part of the column is partisans defecting to the opposite party's candidate. And as you can see, 2020, 2016, 2012, a little bit in 2008, there's fewer people. The bottom line of this graph is fewer people are defecting to the other party's candidate in presidential elections. So you have fewer Republicans voting for a Democratic candidate in a presidential election today. They're remaining loyal partisans than say back in 72, 76, 80. Some of you might remember the term Reagan Democrats, right? There was a narrative and some evidence that Democrats voted for Ronald Reagan in reasonably large numbers compared to what Democrats would vote for a Republican candidate today. So when it comes to candidates, it would become very polarized too. And part of this does also play into to a concept that political scientists have talked about recently. So our polarization that we are divided as a society and within our elected offices. Also, something that contributes to this is what we call negative partisanship. So if you have a friend or family member, who they don't really have a lot of political stances, but they know what they're not, that's negative partisanship. So you see bumper stickers that say not a liberal, not a conservative, and they're not saying what they are, but they know what they're against, and that's what some of this shows. So I have two examples here. I have a sign with the Democratic donkey and it crossed out, and it says freedom, not socialism. So they know what they're against, although they do kind of tell what they're for here too. But aren't we all for freedom? We just define it differently. and then there's another one here, this Republican Party elephant that just says criminals and morons. So, so, you know, it's this negative partisanship is basically, I know what I'm against. You're not really voting for something, but you know what you're against. And it's pretty easy to get people riled up against something and not for things. So, which also makes the work of a nonpartisan organization like yours and different groups I'm involved in kind of difficult too, because people want to be riled up about things that they're against. So, so this has contributed to our divisive partisan politics too. Now, I mentioned earlier that Bowling Green recently started the Democracy and Public Policy Research Network. This is a thing in the political science department that the president of our university and our department work together to start this, kind of in response to, if some of you have heard about some of the conservative thought institutes that were put into the budget in Columbus last year. So you have some different institutes at different campuses that are getting government funding from the State House. And and basically what we said was, we don't want one of those, even though it comes with money. We want to show Columbus how we do democratic dialogue and nonpartisan dialogue correctly. How do we do civics education correctly? And so we started the Democracy and Public Policy Research Network. Dr. Rob Alexander is the director of that. He's also a fantastic person to invite sometime. He's very good at talking about these exact issues. But so we do a poll of Ohioans, and we've put out a couple of different polls, and I'll explain what this one shows. It's how partisans characterize those from the other party. Results from a September 24 poll from BGSU and YouGov. YouGov implements our survey questions. So Republicans think Democrats are, and then the percentage. So 77% of Republicans think Democrats are dishonest, 79% say closed-minded, 72% immoral, 59% lazy, 57% unintelligent, 13% tolerant, and 9% honest. Democrats, and I'm reading the whole thing off because I know the people in the back trouble seeing this. So Democrats think Republicans are, and this is the percentage of Democrats who think the Republicans are dishonest, 84%, closed-minded, 88%, immoral, 75%, lazy, 43%, unintelligent, 67%, tolerant, 4%, and honest, 10%. We don't think very highly of each other. only, right? Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. There's you know, it's very hard. It's very hard to do work surrounding issues and find coalitions of Democrats and Republicans to get on the same side of an issue that we think is right. When everything is seen through a partisan lens, and when Democrats think only 10% of Republicans are honest, and Republicans think only 9% of Democrats, or 9%, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that, that's actually incorrect how I stated that. 10% of Democrats polled said that they believe Republicans are honest. 90% say, no, Republicans are dishonest. And then pretty similar numbers here. Sorry for misstating how that actually works. Bottom line is we don't think very highly of each other. So just moving into some of the threats to democracy that we've seen recently. Sorry, this is not the most positive presentation. So we've seen some things here, and this is again, this is not everything. It's very hard to keep track of everything going on today. We see deteriorating electoral process, different policies that keep people from voting, different, you can see the headlines here, Trump refusing to concede, which is breaking norm. I got a photo here of January 6th. Voter fraud claims on social media, misinformation, things that are undercutting our elections. That there's actually very little evidence of in modern history, there's very little evidence of actual voter fraud, but there's a whole lot of policies out there that are trying to keep people from voting or, you know, make it harder to vote based on this problem that we don't have much evidence for. So there's some problems with deteriorating in the electoral process. The kind of diminishing of the First Amendment. So the White House takes over the press pool, which was usually independent and in the White House. So the White House grabbing more control of the independent press. I threw in Senate Bill 1, banning students from learning views that aren't the state approved ones. That's from an article. So Senate Bill 1 has some, it doesn't exactly say that, but it has some implications to it that we worry about freedom of speech issues. And then threatening to jail protesters. We're seeing increased activity in this kind of threats to freedom of speech. You know, drafting executive orders to eliminate the Department of Education, which the president actually can't do. That was created by an act of Congress, but they can undercut the Department of Education a lot, which is what is happening. Overstepping your constitutional authority, judges pointing this out, or judges ruling that the executive is overstepping their presidential authority, and then being ignored, which is dangerous. So we'll see what happens. These are one of the things that I try to keep myself grounded with, is that these are processes, right? You see something, you go, well, that's clearly unconstitutional. My students were like, earlier this semester, one of my students said, Trump signed an executive order to ban birthright citizenship, That's clearly unconstitutional, right? And I said, well, yes, so that's not gonna happen. Well, the courts are gonna take this up, they're gonna make arguments, they're gonna come to a ruling, and they're like, but that should just be really simple. It should be done, it's done right now. I'm like, I wish the court system moved that quick, but there would be challenges, and you know, things will happen. And so we see these things that are really concerning. You know, the breaking of democratic norms, there's a lot of different ones, you know, not conceding a fair election, withholding funding from federal bureaucracies, a lot of breaking of our norms in politics right now that has also contributed to how divisive this has been. I don't, you know, many examples. So one of the things that I try to do as an individual, because I know one of the things I was asked when I was asked to come talk is, we're looking for things to think about as individuals and collectively as a group. And in these times, it is really easy, Republican or Democrat, just looking at the division and the controversy around different issues, it's very easy to kind of get lost in all of the stuff going on. And it's hard to keep track of this stuff. It's very easy to get riled up about things. And one of the ways that I try to remain grounded, these are not times, these are not the most stable times, right? We have important work to do to defend democratic institutions. But I think it's worth keeping into perspective sometimes that we've had contentious elections in this country before. We've had threats to freedom of speech, especially during wartime. Red Scare, things that, you know, threatening to arrest or arresting protesters is not a totally new thing. These are all bad. People died, lots of horrible outcomes. I'm not saying we should just sit back and like ride it out, but it's good to keep things into perspective sometimes, that we've been through some pretty rough times, and it's through the work of organizations like yours and things I'm involved in and other organizations that we get through. So we have to keep doing the work though. Undermining the federal bureaucracy, stopping funds to federal departments that you don't like. Nixon did that actually, maybe not to the extent of President Trump, but it hasn't been done before. So in some ways, we're in unprecedented territory. In other ways, it helps to keep this some perspective. I'll sometimes have students that are like, these are the most divisive times in our history. And I'll be like, there was that Civil War. Like, just saying it. Like, there's a lot of violence during the Civil Rights Movement. There was, you know, 4 dead in Ohio, campus protests. I mean, we've seen some really, and I'm not saying that I'm certainly not saying that what's happening right now in politics is okay, but try and keep myself grounded here and focusing on, I find it very helpful to focus on not projecting too much into like what might happen, focus on what is happening, especially in my conversations with friends and family, to try and talk them from the ledge a little bit, be like, okay, this decision has happened. It's very easy to then go, I have 2 kids on IEPs, right? So lots of, you don't know that, you know that now. IEP stands for Individual Education Plan at Kenwood. And you know, with these cuts to the Department of Education, I'm getting a lot of family members and like, this is gonna, you know, here's all these terrible things that are gonna happen. And I'm like, well, maybe, but we haven't been told anything yet. And we're focusing on our next IEP meeting and getting them the services they need and things like that. I've had friends text me about SB1, you know, very, very concerned about SB1, and I'm like, I tell them, okay, there's a lot of things in SB1 that as a professor, I don't like either, but I refuse to teach both sides of Jim Crow. So don't, you know, relax. I'm going in to teach American government the same way I always teach it, and it'll be okay. So you know, try to stay grounded. Yeah, hopefully it'll be okay. Oh, which is why you know your professors need me. And so this is where am I at here? Oh, not bad. Okay, not bad. My alarm was set as 10:35, and my alarm to tell me to shut up was for like 10:38. So yeah, I've got a couple things, but yeah, you wanna.
That very poster in Idaho, a teacher was threatened, her job was threatened because she had it in her classroom and was ordered to take it down.
That's exactly why I put it up there. So the comment was, that very poster, thank you for being a step ahead of me. That very poster I have up here now that I'll describe in a minute was put on a wall in a teacher's classroom in Idaho, and they were told to take it down because it was considered political. And that demonstrates, so my question here on the slide is, what can be done to defend democracy? And in a nonpartisan way, in the poster, shows a bunch of different hands from different racial backgrounds, and it says everyone in all different colors, everyone is welcome here. And it is extremely hard to defend democratic institutions and do nonpartisan work when this is considered partisan, right? This puts us in a very, very difficult position to do the good work. Yes, in the back.
I think that what the administration said is that she's not allowed to put anything up in her room that's her opinion. And that's an opinion because not everybody believes that brown-skinned people should be welcome.
Let me repeat the comment.
I read that when I was trying to figure out the line.
So the administration told the teacher that she had to take down the poster because it was an opinion and not everybody believes that everyone is welcome. Which still plays back to our partisan politics today, but is not the answer, hey, this is partisan, right? So that's the climate we're dealing with, which is no surprise to most of us, but that's the climate we're dealing with. Yes, over here.
Right now, I think that everybody would agree, Democrats and Republicans, that social security is a good thing. 73 million Americans get social security. However, and Congress through a continuing resolution cannot get rid of social security. However, what they're doing is they're laying off 7,000 people in the social security offices, closing social security offices, and telling everybody they have to be in person in an office they can't get to. And so they're plan to destroy social security by just breaking the system.
Yeah, so
So is that partisan or not partisan?
right. So to summarize the comment, Republicans and Democrats support Social Security, and Social Security can't be gotten rid of unilaterally by the executive office, but it can be undermined, and it is being undermined by cutting workers to the Social Security Administration and making people return to work and in person. And not allowing them to work from home.
So you have to, if you let Social Security change, you have to go to their office, but their offices are being closed and there aren't people there to take care of it.
Right, you can't take phone calls to change for your Social Security anymore. You have to go in person, which of course then is a burden on the individual. Yes, that's I have heard. I do have two things I want to say. About like how we defend democracy, and then I'll open it up to more. Thank you for, it's always good when you get questions. People are, I haven't bored you to death. I appreciate it. Okay, so a couple of things we can do. Deliberative democracy, this is some of the things we've talked about, I talked about earlier in this. Researchers at Stanford suggest that deliberative democracy that's informed and moderated discussion that transcends partisan identities can help depolarize society. So this is one of the things our Democracy and Public Policy Research Network is trying to do, get people from different parties into, former politicians, a lot of retired politicians, get them into the room together and have these conversations with the public in person. It's a lot easier to be mean on the internet, as you know, and try to get this deliberation in person. While having these discussions while avoiding direct references to political parties or specific politicians, and discussions that focus on issues. These are things this group focuses on issues, so this falls right into. There is research that we can find more common ground if we do this kind of thing, because people return to, it's almost like the football team they root for. Like as soon as they hear Republican or Democrat, they line up with they don't actually discuss the idea. So I've had students say before that they've talked to their relatives who politically disagree with them, and if they bring up certain words, then they get a lot of pushback. But if they just describe what the program is or describe it, that actually sounds like a good idea. So like trying to talk about ideas and issues through deliberative democracy can really help depolarize us, which can maybe help soften our division. And I have one other thing. It sometimes feels like you're not getting anywhere with this stuff. Trust me, did a bunch about SB1 myself. It does sometimes feel like you're not getting anywhere with this stuff, but activism actually, it does work. If you have issues you care about and defend, and you want to defend, it's hard. The partisan side of things, okay, whatever you do, it's better to do something than not do something. So if somebody's always going to call you partisan or biased or whatever it is. But these things like volunteering, making phone calls, writing postcards, attending protests, submitting testimony, talking to friends and family, these things do matter, even if they don't matter on the individual issues that you care about, like the specific bill you're trying to stop or get passed. The political capital of politicians is not unlimited. You can give them a cost. You can jam up their phone lines, you can flood their boxes, you can show up at the State House. These are photos from the State House on Wednesday. And showing some protest signs for those in the back that can't see. the one says gross fine, Governor DeWine, veto SB one, and so on. But one of the things that SB one is gonna pass, so a specific issue, right? But one of my colleagues in the education department spoke to the crowd on Wednesday, and one of the things she pointed out was something I think is kind of important to remember when it comes to, you don't always win all the political battles, but this stuff matters, is that she was a professor in Utah before coming to Bowling Green, and Utah did the same kind of SB one like thing, and there was not a peep, like they just slid it right through. And recently, Utah actually took away all collective bargaining rights for public employees after that. Like SB 5, which is, was part of my master's thesis when I was here, and part of my research, but SB 5 from 2011 that took away collective bargaining rights for police, firefighters, teachers, all that stuff. Utah just did that, and they did it. I study a lot of firefighter unions now because of the program I run. And they're just like, nobody asked for this and just slid right through because they didn't have the opposition. You have to at least make politicians think about the next thing they're gonna do. Because if we don't do this kind of work about the issues we care about, then the people who wanna do things you don't want to happen, they're gonna go, well, we did this, and nobody seemed to care. What are we gonna do next? So at least you gotta exact a political cost. And so from there, let's talk. Yes, back.
Yeah, I wanted to come today to sort of make everybody aware of an issue that's very important, I think. Senate Joint Resolution 3, have you heard about that?
I not off, maybe, but hey, wait, instead of me repeating it, would you mind coming up here?
Sorry.
If you don't mind, rather than me trying to explain to everybody, I'm happy to share the microphone. I don't with my students, you're special. Hey, so try not, yeah, tell us about it.
Sure, Senate Joint Resolution 3 has already had 2 hearings in Columbus. Our illustrious Teresa Gavarone is co-chair of the committee that's hearing these. And what it does is it calls for a federal constitutional convention. And if this goes through, then the entire Constitution from top to bottom can be rewritten. And the way that the choice for like delegates to this convention is, it can be rewritten in a completely partisan way. So, essentially the Republicans, all these problems they're having with the courts and so forth can be eliminated. Just a couple highlights, because they've only heard proponent testimony so far. One of the points a speaker made was that we need to get rid of directly electing senators and go back to having them appointed by the governors. Another point, this one woman near the end of the second hearing, she let slip, her name was Tells, T-E-L-L-E-S, and she said, well, what we need to do this to help Doge. In other words, they know that the things Doge is doing are unconstitutional, so rewrite the Constitution and now we don't have problems anymore. So I wanted to make people aware that this is happening because so far, these first 2 hearings just slid completely under the radar. There's been no press coverage, everyone's looking at SB1, which is great and essential, but this, I think, long-term has a greater threat to democracy.
Can you tell us the number again?
SJR 3, Senate Joint Resolution 3.
How many states have to sign on to this for it to happen? Does it have to be a certain number of states, right?
Right, it's 3/4 of the state, and a number of them have already signed on, and there's 10 states in the process controlled by Republicans that are trying to do the same thing. And if all 10 of those succeed, then they'll have a constitutional convention. And so, yeah, 3/4, right? So yeah, it's Article 5 of the Constitution. And Article 5 describes how to start the rewriting process, but it doesn't put any parameters on that rewriting process. So once it begins, the people in that convention can do literally anything they want to the Constitution, get rid of the Bill of Rights, whatever. So it's completely open season.
It's the same question.
I'm familiar from meeting you the other day. I'm confused because I did look up that language, and you're right, it's had a couple of hearings in our state capital.
Right.
I thought there were limits placed though on what the state of Ohio's application to the federal government for convention. I thought there were some limits on what they were asking for.
That's what the proponents are saying. Oh, we can put whatever limits we want on it. But so far, if you go to the website, Defend Our Democracy, or Defend Our Constitution, excuse me, defendourconstitution.org, run by Common Cause. And essentially, because once it's convened, it's a federal organization, a federal agency, it can ignore any instructions that is given from the states. So, yeah.
Trickery, basically.
Right, so they're claiming, oh, well, we can put in there before we send our delegates, don't touch the Bill of Rights, don't do this, don't do that. But once they get there, then the state of Ohio has no authority over what they actually do. So that's part of what they're lying about.
I have a question about the notion of constitutional crisis.
So one thing, real quick, I think is important to note is, it's important to track these ideas as they're running through state legislatures, but it does take two-thirds of the state legislatures to sign on to constitutional changes and things like that. So it is a pretty high bar. Any representative can, it's good to keep an eye on these things for sure, because people, they have these ideas and they're willing to bring them out but anyone in these state legislatures or in Congress can introduce any bill saying anything. So, like a bill that eliminates term limits for the president or something like that is usually a show. I'm not saying that's what this is. People have these real ideas, but there is a higher bar. So push back on these things. But 2/3 of state legislatures, and it's a long road before you get to the throwing out of the Bill of Rights. Yes.
So you said that you talk to your students and they will say, well, that's a violation of the Constitution, therefore no problem, right? That's kind of their mentality. How do you talk to them and say, right, but also the Constitution is only as sound as the public support for the Constitution.
Right.
How do you have that conversation?
So the question is, when my students say that that's clearly unconstitutional, and then kind of dismiss the issue, how do I address, I'm paraphrasing here, the constitutional crisis argument and where we're at here, that the Constitution only matters as much as we care about it. And so, yeah, I have students that think that the language is really clear. And so therefore, that this is going to get thrown out, or therefore they can't do this. And one of the things we talk about when we talk about the federal judiciary is that the judges matter, the justices matter, that interpretation of the Constitution matters. So the way that I end up addressing that is that also related back to contract language, because studying labor union stuff. But two people can look at the same article and have different interpretations. They can look at the same language and have different interpretations. We've overturned major precedents, major constitutional precedents through court cases when the Constitution hasn't changed at all. But the interpretation of what matters in the Constitution does change. And so I try to tell them our interpretation of the Constitution and judges' interpretation of the Constitution is more of a fluid process. And we need to take very seriously how the judges are interpreting the Constitution, or else it does get thrown out. It becomes irrelevant. And I have colleagues so one of the things that you should consider in the future, I think is, that's it, I'm trying not to give more work to my colleagues, but I have some colleagues who study, they don't study domestic politics, I do state politics and American politics. I have colleagues that study, you know, countries in Europe and around the world, and what they worry about, what one of them said to the committee that he worries about is, and again, this is projecting into the future, I'm not saying this is gonna happen, but you see something like this happen in other countries, and what he worries about is President Trump has appointed a number of people to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court leans more conservative. Having a conservative Supreme Court and a Republican president is not, we've had, you know, the courts line up with the presidency plenty of times, but he gets this conservative Supreme Court, they do things like overturn Roe v. Wade and do things that make the public very angry with the courts. So even during the Biden administration, we're talking about possibly packing the courts. Really, we didn't seriously talk about it, but it was floated kind of for the first time since FDR talked about it. And so we've got this, people don't like the Supreme Court. And part of that is because of the change in the ideology and the overturning of precedents in the Supreme Court. Okay, so that's first condition. President Trump gets back into office, and then when the courts start trying to stop his executive actions, he then says, I don't care about what the courts say, creating this constitutional crisis possibly. And then the courts can't do anything to stop it. He's got some immunity now from something that they, from a court case that they had earlier decided on. And then what my colleague worries about is if we get to the point, if all those things are happening and we get to the point where we're seriously in constitutional crisis and the president says the Supreme Court's illegitimate anyway, that's actually gonna be a popular position because people are mad at the courts. And that's dangerous. Like whether I agree or disagree with their interpretation of these things, if we don't uphold the legitimacy of these courts, we are gonna end up in constitutional crisis because we need to check on the executive power, whether you like what the court does or not. They gotta be taken seriously, so. I know that's that's, yeah. Yeah, over here.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, you mentioned, what the two parties think of each other and, you know, how this contributes to the political polarization in the country. And there is evidence you showed the grounds. So is there any evidence about, I guess I have two questions. Is there any evidence about what most Americans think about those citizens who oppose American foreign policy, especially in the last year and a half, and did vote in the last elections? And how does that, if at all, contribute to more polarization, maybe a different kind of polarization?
So the question was, what data do we have about how Americans feel about people who maybe oppose American foreign policy and did not vote, and how does that contribute to polarization? I don't have any specific data for you. I'm sure there is data out there. That's a really good question, and I'll focus on the what about people not voting part of that. That there was this talk during the election because of American foreign policy that you only have two choices, the two-party system, and so you have people who are would otherwise maybe align with one party, but then there's unpopular positions that they're taking, so they decide to withhold themselves from the process. And we also get this question with electoral outcomes when it comes to third parties. People go, well, if it wasn't for, I mean, you remember the 2000 election, right? If it wasn't for so-and-so, or staying home or voting third party or whatever, my neighbor down the street, then the election would have been different. And one of the things that polarization does do is bring people out to vote. So voter rates have been pretty healthy of the registered voters, and how we feel about people who don't vote. It does contribute to our polarization, but it's kind of hard for me to pin down exactly how. We do a lot of finger pointing, right? Like we do, and that doesn't help our discourse, because people get into their teams and support their candidates from their team, and we like to make excuses for the positions of our candidates and deflect blame onto the other party, and other voters will say, no, you have to actually earn my vote. Like, I'm not just going to default to the party I align with the most. These people are doing things I'm upset about, and so it's really a product that this blaming the non-voters, which more people, always happy to have more people voting, is really a product of a two-party system that you're given two choices because of single member districts, and so some people are going to feel left out of this process ideologically. They're not always going to vote for a candidate that they feel is not actually representative of them. There's other systems across the world in advanced liberal democracies. They have trade-offs. The trade-off of not having a member for your district, having proportional representation, much more division, multiple parties in Congress or in your house or whatever, however it's set up. But yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah. Yes.
So we're talking about the non-voter. Are there any studies or data on what works to get those people to vote? Because we have all gone out to registered voters, and you're going up and say, would you like to get registered to vote? The election is in such and such time. And people go, no, go away. So it's like, are there any studies on what works to get people to vote?
Sure. And there are. And I think one of the important things to remember, because I've done some door-to-door work myself and done some registration work, the important thing to remember is that in order to make a difference, you don't have to get everyone, right? So anecdotally, we all remember the person that yells at us and then refuses. But if we get a couple, you get a couple, they get a couple, we might have 8 people saying no, but it adds up. And so the face-to-face work, actually, research suggests that it does work, like talking to people face-to-face. This last election cycle, I haven't done canvassing for campaigns in a little while, but I did write postcards. And for the postcard, it was just a get out the vote campaign, a nonpartisan get out the vote campaign. So what I mean by nonpartisan is that it was a campaign done by a group that wasn't necessarily nonpartisan, but the campaign, the postcard campaign itself didn't tell you who to vote for. It just encouraged you to vote. So the research showed the different messages mattered. And so when we wrote things on the postcards, if you just wrote, please get out and vote, that was a less effective, research showed that was a less effective message. One of the messages they actually suggested to us in this campaign based on data was, I thought it was kind of an interesting peer pressure message. I think the message we were supposed to write, they gave us a number of effective ones that data showed this is actually effective in getting people out to vote. And the message was, hi, enter name, thank you for being a voter. Who you vote for is private, but whether you vote is public record. Please be sure to vote on November 5th. And believe it or not, research on controlled experiments that would be done by other political scientists who study voting, we give people those 2 prompts, how much more likely are you to vote? Statistically significant, more people were likely to vote getting those cards that said, who you vote for is private, but we know whether you voted or not. It's a weird thing, but there are some things that campaigns use, that different groups use, that do show that they help get people out. I think there's probably, no, I'm gonna get you, I got you. I think a lot of face-to-face work is really valuable too. I do postcards more now because the kids are little and, yeah. I used to push the oldest in the stroller, and hand out flyers, but they're hard, they're like herding cats, they don't stay, you know, so, I gotta do the postcards and mail those now. Yes, in the back.
I got a question.
I know, I think we're a little over time though, right?
Okay, I'll make it fast.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
I work at a food bank locally, and last year most of our clients voted for Trump. And yesterday, the government cut $500 million from food banks, which is really going to kill us locally because at least half of our food comes from the Department of Ag. And how do you get that disconnect between they voted for Trump? How did they not know what was going to happen? Because they have access to all the information in the world, but 90% of our clients still voted for Trump. And now all those decisions are just going to wipe out their lives this coming year. That's my question.
Yeah, and let me summarize. There's a good example here, and I won't get into the example for those of you who might not have heard it, but the root of the question here is, how do you talk to and convince people of information that would be relevant to them when they're arguably voting against their own interest? Voting for, they rely on this assistance and this federal government funding, but then they vote for candidates who then cut that, which then hurts themselves. And like, how do you do that? And how do you get through to that person? First off, I would say people don't like being told that they're voting against their own interest, right? Like, hey, you're voting against, you don't know what you're doing, right? So you try not to shame. You can shame people. Apparently, you can shame people about whether they vote or not, and that works. But people don't like being told that who they voted for, is against their own interest. A lot of times people don't realize, one of the things I think we're seeing right now is we don't realize how much we rely on federal government funding for things that even though you're not getting the service. So I always tell students in public admin when we talk about federalism, and the federal government has the resources, but so they have the money, more so than the states, and then your public employees are mostly state and local workers. So this funding gets handed down to the states to then do these programs. And so it's important to have those conversations with people about where the resources are coming from and which candidates support the resources that even though they don't realize. So I would encourage us to all keep talking about the issues and keep talking about like what the importance is behind, what's behind the things. My wife is the director of the Wood County Museum, and they have an exhibit that they got a grant for recently, and they got a grant from a historical society. I can't get into the details. I don't know the details exactly, but they didn't think they'd be affected by federal cuts. But it turns out where they got the grant from, they get their money from the federal government. So, like making sure we're talking to people about these issues. And trying to make sure that they understand what the consequences are of those issues without being condescending. Because the thing is, we often go, how can this person vote like this? This is totally against their own interest, but the interest we're defining is ours. We go, what we think their best interests are. How can the farmers do this? They're undercutting themselves. That's because we think they're undercutting themselves. Maybe they have other things that they care about, and it's not just that they're uninformed, because, yeah. So like I do this with, they could be uninformed too, but I do this with like, I sometimes fall into this category. Obviously, I care very much about my public employee union. I go, well, how can you work in this environment and not support? And it's because people care about other issues outside. They don't view themselves as their primary identity isn't public employee at a state university. They have other things they care about which align with the other party. It's tough to not tell somebody what their own interest is. And sometimes that interest can be something outside of what we believe is their best interest. Yeah, I'll go in the back here and then up here. Yes.
Just real quick follow-up to her question. I mean, I'm a little bit more of a radical politician. I'm the co-chair of the Green Party, so we're famous for being blunt. They explain why we have such small percentages. But my reaction to what she said is that, well, you should just make a little postcard when they have to cut the amount of food we're giving people, and just say, why is there less food, and put Trump as our funding. That's why we have less money for food. And that would be my reaction. But would that be effective, or is that like going back? What are your earlier slides says? Don't mention politicians, don't mention parties.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So the tactic of if people who are voting for the politicians who are then cutting their I'm going to just say benefits generally, their programs that they benefit from, is it a good strategy to, when those cuts happen, tell them, like in a postcard, like here's why, and mention Trump cut this. So that there's a couple things about that. I think it's a good idea to be forward about why things are happening. So my spouse has a wide variety of political ideologies on her historical society board. She went to them and said, we might not be able to do this exhibit, but didn't turn it into backlash against Trump. Just said the federal government is cutting, and then let them, go, well, who's in the federal government right now? Let them connect those dots. So I would say making sure that people are aware of what's going on. But if you want to do so in a way that they're not going to dismiss it, because if they really love President Trump, they're not going to take the card seriously. So it might be better to say the federal government cut these things, and then let them think about who the federal government is. But yeah, sometimes we do have to be blunt, right? But yeah, it does come back to if you can get through to people if you keep the partisanship out of it a little bit, because you sometimes won't get through to people if they love President Trump, they're not going to take what you're saying seriously necessarily. So yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for how to get our representatives to have town hall meetings?
I thought it was this comes back to, remember how I said activism does matter, whether you think you're winning or losing on specific issues. There's enough stuff going on that the controlling party in Congress has been told, for those of you who may not know, they've been told, don't have town halls, so they know that people are angry, right? And then that's a really good question. Sorry, I should repeat the question, sorry. The question is, any advice for how to get our representatives to actually have town halls? And I don't have a great answer to that, or they'd be having town halls right now, because I wouldn't withhold that great answer, but public shame, basically calling them out on these things, right? We flood their inboxes, they know we're angry. Political pressure, they're still, that still does work, but in the short term, they're not right now, but they're gonna be called out enough, especially when it comes to campaign season, because their opponents are gonna use that against them. Even in a gerrymandered district, or if District 15 is heavily toward one party or another, where they have an advantage, you're still gonna be called out on that. And the next election, so regardless of your individual politics, midterm elections are usually really bad for the party in power. Right after the 2024 election, under the time flies, right after the 2024 election, there's always these, for either party, whichever party is out of power. What do they do? What do they do? What do they do? Well, for better or for worse, as long as electoral democracy stands, for better or for worse, the two-party system results in I shrugged my shoulders and said all they have to do is exist, like to end up in power again. Because the midterm elections are usually very bad for presidents. There's only been one midterm election where the president actually gained a bunch of seats in the last how many other decades. Although actually, I think there might be one under Biden, but 2002 is the big one we usually use as an example. Biden actually had a pretty good midterm too, but usually you lose seats and it's a backlash against the party in power. So where that comes back to your question is, their opponents, especially in districts that are competitive, because you can't gerrymander all of them, especially in districts where they are competitive, that's gonna be important because their opponents are gonna, and their opponents' supporters are gonna push them to talk to people and actually do town halls. Wish I had a better strategy though. Yeah.
So what can we as a group do? You pointed out for individuals, we can be active, but as a group, trying to be nonpartisan. What do we do? What can we do?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So the question is, as a group, to try and remain nonpartisan but defend the issues you care about, what can you do? First off, I would say, to reiterate a little bit earlier, don't overthink being cast off as partisan, because somebody is always going to call your group partisan. Whatever you do, there's going to be people who dismiss it for partisan. So that's not taking action is better than not taking action. That being said, how do you do so in a way that's you don't get dismissed as nonpartisan, and you can do the good work to maybe cut down this polarization? This is the kind of group groups like this can hold the same kind of events, education, voter education events, things that if you do so in a nonpartisan way, can actually make a real effect, whether you feel it or not. So I hate to just say keep doing the good work you're doing, but like things like deliberative democracy, like getting people in a room and talking about issues and not parties is effective. So focusing on the issues and encouraging those dialogues. I am glad that question got asked, because besides the suggestions that I have about this kind of work, I'm interested to hear what other people think. So, yes.
To answer that question, I think something that's basically is nonpartisan is Social Security. And we need this, 1988, I believe is the last time they modified the Social Security to make it viable for longer. We need this opportunity at this point in time to say to our representatives on both sides of the aisle, fix Social Security for the next 75 years, and they could do that by taking the cap off the Social Security. It's not something they couldn't do in an afternoon. If they sat down and said, let's fix it, because people out there are upset with us for saying that we're gonna lose Social Security. We'll hire more Social Security people, we'll open more offices, we'll make Social Security work for people.
Yeah, so to summarize, Social Security is an issue that crosses party lines, and we ought to be able to find some common ground on things like Social Security and force them to open offices back up and things like that. We might see some of that when we get some changes in Congress. It's pretty early in the Trump administration, so we might see more things happening later when there's more pressure put on him from a Congress that isn't just going along with these DOGE cuts and things like that. But I am very annoyed by the Department of Government Efficiency, not a partisan statement. I hate the name. It's not a department. It's not a department. Yes. But anyway, yeah, that's a good point. So the Social Security Fairness Act that was just passed, I forget exactly what the technical title was, benefited a lot of people who worked in the private sector enough to collect Social Security, but then paid got less in their Social Security because they went into public sector work and got a public sector retirement. My father, who was a public employee, worked enough quarters in the private sector, got a bump in his social security because of this. My aunt did. Talking to people, so when it comes to crossing partisan lines, a lot of people have been affected by that. People like working in the fire service, because I know I've worked with a lot of firefighters. If you got penalized because you ended up a public employee, those benefits run to Republicans and Democrats. And so talking about the importance of Social Security and those issues and supporting these kinds of changes can go a long way. So, who am I holding up? Who's the next speaker? What's the next? Okay. It's okay. Just keep going. It's a dangerous thing. The family is going to start wondering where I am. No, they're done. They're done by now. I'm safe. But I appreciate it. Yeah.
You talked about how to deal with, how to talk to your students who are educated people. How do you talk to uneducated people? You know, every time you say anything, it's been news, or I actually had what you're speaking is lies, you're listening to lies. But they don't, then they just say, well, that's what you listen to. But what I'm saying is that my brother-in-law actually said to me that Obama was a communist, fascist, socialist.
Oh, yeah.
And when I tried to explain that you can't be all those three things at the same time, he was totally lost interest. It's like, how do you deal with things like this? Without sounding condescending.
Yeah, this is a very good question. So the question was, how do you, when it's one thing to be talking to educated people, which of course, when you hold like the kind of events that I'm talking about, deliberative democracy, you're not always getting to the people that you really need to get to, right? How do you talk to uneducated people who might hold some really odd views? Like the example was someone who said that President Obama was a fascist, communist, and socialist all in one. These terms, a lot of times just become meaningless because we've hurled them at lots of politicians, and people don't really understand the differences. When I'll try to frame this in a way, because if I could get through to some of the people that I have on social media that are friends of friends or family friends or whatever, if I could get through to them, I would have a long time ago. So I don't have a great answer, but when I deal with this like face to face and I have somebody make a very absurd claim, which by the way, SB1 now, I have to allow students to draw their own conclusions. So they can, right, which I do anyway.
Yes.
I do anyway, but like I have to be more hesitant in pushing back on kind of with things that are absurd. And the thing is, my style has never been to embarrass a student in front of other people, even if they have like what I think are terrible views or just things that they believe things are completely incorrect. The things I do if I'm in a group, if I have other students around, I'll be like, okay, that's an interesting perspective. Would anyone like to respond to that? Let somebody else, because if it's coming from me, I have the power position. And so if you're in a group with these people, you can try and deflect and see if somebody else can try and explain, and it doesn't look so bad for you. But you're talking about kind of a different case where you're one-on-one and you're on equal ground. You have power over them, like a professor-student relationship. As easy as it is to like want to just tell them they're wrong and here's why, I find that pushing people a little bit to explain what they mean can sometimes make them run in circles. Whether they realize it or not, they have no idea what they mean. And I get this out to liberal family members who say some things that they're just, they've gone into. I'm like, ooh, you're starting to sound, this is a little conspiratorial. So I hear it from, some pretty extreme things sometimes. And I just like, kind of, so what about him made him communist and socialist? Like which one? What things, what So why do you think that's gonna happen? Or you just kind of start like poking some holes in their logic and see if they can get there, but you frame it as kind of an honest question rather than this is why you're totally wrong. Because obviously you know why what they're saying is ridiculous. So try to lead them to the ridiculous part of it. That's kind of what, ask them to explain more. I mean, maybe not that specific example, but yeah, well, here's what's gonna happen in the Trump administration. Okay, so why do you think that? And then if you have any, that's when you have the chance, and that when you get them to explain themselves, that's when you kind of have the chance to present more. Well, but if that's true, then, and then kind of present little pieces of information that hopefully lead them to realizing that they're not right. It's a lot more work than being like, no, you're wrong. It takes a lot more patience, I'll tell you that. Pretend you're talking to my 9-year-old. Yeah. This is a lot of fun. This is a lot of fun. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you all, and maybe next time I'll have all the answers. I'll have it fixed. Yeah. So let's see. Tuesday, April 1st. April Fools. It's not a joke though. We have a leadership luncheon on campus with former governors of both parties. It's part of this deliberative democracy thing we're doing through the Democracy and Public Policy Research Network. I teach at the time, so I actually don't know all the details, but I can maybe send you. Either you could.
If you go to go to the Democracy and Public Policy.
If you look at the Democracy and Public Policy Research Network BGSU page, so if you push that into the search engine.
And you register, there's no money involved. You show up and they'll feed you. And they have the Republican ex-governor, Democratic ex-governor, talking about civility.
Yeah. So yeah, civility in politics, Republican ex-governor, Democratic ex-governor, and there's food involved. I wish I knew the location, but like I said,
It's at the student
it's in the
union.
ballroom of the student union. Okay.
It starts at 11. It goes from 11 to 1. And it sounds like anybody can go.
Yeah.
They don't say only, they say everybody. I mean,
If you got an email from us a couple weeks ago or a couple days ago when we announced this, there's a link to the registration on there for that event.
Yeah, you're welcome. Mind if I stay a little bit? Okay, cool. Yeah.
I'm Erin Hochtel, and on behalf of the league, again, thank you to Dominic for that presentation. So a lot of you are asking, oh, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? So I wanted to give you all an update on where we're at with some strategic planning. And really the focus of that work that we've been doing over the last couple of months has been to ensure that our local league is ready to take action and to be a space where people can do all of these things that we've been talking about today. So last fall, we decided we needed to have a meeting, get folks together and talk about what are we doing as a league to be effective in our mission to empower voters and defend democracy. And so we held that session back in January, and now we're in the phase where we're actually taking that work that folks came together to do and put some action steps around it. So I wanted to just do a quick couple of updates and highlights and talk about the ways that that work is moving forward. So what we did is ask the group to talk about what actions and resources do we need to focus on right now to be effective in doing our mission. And so the actions that the group identified kind of, we have multiple things, but these are kind of the top three. that we said, these are the things we can do right now to make sure that we are effective. So improve our communication, both internally and externally. Make sure that the board is structured in a way that we can be effective in fulfilling our mission, and do things to increase member engagement and participation. And then in terms of the resources that we determined we needed to have some kind of concrete things that people could get a hold of. So communication materials like reviving our newsletter, doing more to ensure that board minutes are publicized and accessible to folks, and use our social media more. There's a great appetite for more regular monthly gatherings. So getting folks together, having conversations, finding places to take action, and then just making those spaces where people could contribute their ideas for attention-getting action. So we have done that already. I have no spots in the headline of this. SPOTS is our acronym for strategic plans on the shelf. We're not doing that. So we didn't get together to make a plan and then not do anything. We did immediately start to ramp up our use of our available communication resources. So all of our social media accounts. We had a member step up and say, I'm going to start organizing monthly coffee chats. And we have hosted those now 2 months, and there's another one scheduled coming up. We held a Light for Our Democracy event a couple weeks ago to bring people together, to connect and make sure that we are a local force to defend democracy. And we're also convening a small group to go through our board structure and make some recommendations on how we can best be positioned to move this work forward. So one of the things that I challenged folks with as we wrapped up that day was, what is your personal action step? Oftentimes we come out of those and say, the league should, or somebody should. But the challenge to each of us who are members is to say, I will. So my challenge to you all is, how are you answering the question, I will do something that will empower voters and defend democracy? That is what you should be taking, hopefully, out of today, is remembering those things. And there will be more opportunities for you to say yes, so stay tuned, more to come. Thank you.
Before we sign off, I just wanted to give you other ideas of where you can participate. So April 6th is our next coffee meetup. We're still in the works for when our June meeting is going to be. Our face-to-face is October 5th with the candidates. And then these are some other things in the local area that you can get involved with. So they're not league sponsored, but on April 1st is the one at the BGSU that we just talked about. April 5th, there's a group doing a Wood County hands-off protest downtown. That starts at 11 a.m. April 12th, from 2 to 4 at Peace Lutheran Church is the citizens-led town hall public forum. And they'll have advocacy tables around, and they're also planning to do like post club writing before the event at Grounds for Thought, but that hasn't been determined when yet. And then there's also on April 19th at noon, starting at Arlen's Good Beer, a Viking with Representative Bob Gladys. So those are just some things that are going on in our area that where you can get involved and be an activist.
Actually, we wanted to do our candidates forum on October 5th, but by the time I got to reserve the room, that date was already taken, so we'll do it the following Sunday, which is October 12th. So it'll just don't freeze yourself into October 5th.
I have a typo, it's April 3rd, is the Thursday, not April 6th, sorry.
Oh, okay. And one other announcement I would like, and this is may sound kind of off the wall, if you are very frustrated and feel the need to relieve some of your frustration by hitting something, a productive way to think about is that Habitat for Humanity is sponsoring a Women Build event, May 5th on a Friday and May 6th on a Saturday in Bradner, Ohio. And they're building homes for 2 single mothers. The Women Build is going to build the sheds and the decking for these homes. They have time slots from 8 to 11 and from 12 to 3 both days. You have to register. And I just looked at the page this morning, and each one says limited slots left still, between 10 and 15 slots left. And the registration ends March 25th, which is this coming week. So you go to wchabitat.org, so Wood County Habitat, wchabitat.org. And then one of the things on that page says Women Build 2025, and that's where you go to register. And it sounds initially like you have to pay, but it does, but they have a register button and a donate button. So if you're interested, you can follow that up. That's not an official league event at all. So, oh, the cookie ladies. Oh, thank you so much for Helen. Helen Shores is a baker and organizer in Wayne Rex.